And we're live. Hello.
All right.
Hello.
Hello, everybody. We're going to have just a few more people coming in whenever they want to. But we are here today with Hanna Alkaf, the author of The Girl and the Ghost, which is the September book in OwlCrate Jr. And we loved it so much. I was
Oh, thank
doing
you.
a very quick reread this morning, and I was like, oh, right. This is why I chose the book.
I'm glad you reread it and had that thought and not like, oh my God, why did we choose this book?
No,
So
no,
I'm
no.
really glad that your reaction was, oh, I'm so glad I chose it.
So glad that we chose this book. So yes, this was the book in our September Shivers Down Your Spine box. We always love to do a spooky September book so that everything ships and is in everybody's hands in time for Halloween, if Halloween is your thing. So yes, this was definitely the scariest book that we have ever included, but I
Yay.
enjoyed it. So yeah, the three of us will have a chat. Shanleigh has put together some great questions all about the book. So we will ask those. I'll turn it over to Shanleigh soon, but anybody who is watching, and I will repeat this if we get any more people joining us a bit later. Towards the end of the chat, we are going to open it up to questions from the audience. So if you would like to actually ask a question in person with your video on, just give us a heads up in the chat and we will get to you towards the end of the chat. And if you're not comfortable asking with your video on, you can always still just put it in the chat and we will get to it there. But we love to hear from the people watching. I think most of you have probably read the book by this point. We will be spoiling some things. This is not a spoiler-free chat, so just keep that in mind. We will be actually talking about the book. Yeah, without further ado, I will hand it over to Shanleigh.
All right. Hello. So I guess the first thing is just if you wanted to give us a quick rundown about what The Girl and the Ghost is about for anyone who might not finish it just yet or is looking to start it very soon.
Sure. The Girl and the Ghost is the story of a girl named Soraya and a ghost that she inherits from a grandmother that she never knew and turns into the friend and companion that she never really had growing up, with all the dire consequences that comes from making friends with a dark spirit as you grow older and start making your own other friends. It's a story about ghosts, but it's also a story about all the ways that you can be haunted by different things. It's a story about family and about friendships and about loss. But mostly it's a story about a girl and a ghost.
So kind of just like right on the tin there.
Right. You know, I figure you don't let them know what they're getting.
Yeah, fair. You know,
it's a story about a girl and a ghost.
So where did you get the idea for The Girl and the Ghost? What were your inspirations?
I was a kid who grew up loving creepy things, and who grew into an adult who loves creepy things. And so in Malaysia especially, you grow up with these ghosts and ghost stories as a sort of a natural part of your everyday life. It's a sort of part of our fabric of reality that there are ghosts, there are spirits, there are just other things that we share this world with that we can't necessarily see. And so I've always been very interested in the concept of saka, which is generational, our word for generational ghosts that can be inherited from generation to generation. And I wanted to use that in a story, but I also like meshing it with this more Western concept of the imaginary friend, and how it would feel to a little girl to know that your imaginary friend is real, but to also know that the adults in your life probably wouldn't think of it that way. So yeah, I just really wanted to play around with this concept. I always like to take very Western concepts of what fairy tales or stories ought to be, and mesh them with my own cultural upbringing, what it's like to grow up in Malaysia, and my own the fairy tales and the folklore that I grew up with. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to sort of give you a new, well, new to you, but
Fair.
a Malaysian twist to a story that you already know, or to a concept that you already know.
Yeah, I read in our author interview that we featured in our September magazine, you even said that you wanted to combine aspects of the Western fairy tale idea of the fairy godmother as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, an imaginary friend, a fairy godmother, you know, those kinds of things. You have this powerful being who tells you it's always on your side, who is always on your side. But it doesn't work out so well when that thing, that creature, uh, has just always been taught to do dark, bad things, you know?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I like the idea that it's like it is obviously, I know Western fairy tales fairly decently well. And uh, I like that there was sort of an implication of like the older kinds of fairy tales where there was
Mhm.
consequences to your actions.
Right.
Not
The a
everything
big
is going to work out perfectly. Even the fairy godmothers
Yeah,
themselves might not
yeah.
necessarily be doing it for some.
It's I guess more in line with the original sort of grim fairy tales and things like that, rather than the
Violence.
Disneyfied versions of fairy tales, which are much lighter. Older children's stories have a sort of darkness to them,
Mhm.
and weren't afraid to teach children about darkness, which I actually think is a sort of fairly important component of them, of older fairy tales, in that they didn't shy away from the darkness. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to do, and even the language, I tried to sort of evoke a more old school classic fairy tale vibe.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely not your Disney fairy tale.
No.
It's hearkening to an older sort of style.
Yeah. But yeah, it's not like you'd even want it to be Disneyfied. And you make that very clear very early on, right?
Yes.
With Pink, because he will later be
Yes.
drinking Soraya's blood.
Yeah,
Like right from the beginning there.
cool.
Why
You
not?
know,
Why
why
not?
not? Let's throw in some blood magic and see what happens.
Normal things. Everything that, everyone is
No.
curious and asks questions about. So
Why not?
So I'm a big fan of spooky stories too, especially spooky stories for children.
Yes.
They are very fun, but also they do have an importance to them. So what
Mhm.
do you hope that we all take away from reading The Girl and the Ghost?
I hope that kids can learn that there are a lot of scary situations out there, but that they're all braver than they know.
Hmm.
Um, and this is less on the lines of the spooky aspect of the story, but I also hope that you learn to recognize when a friendship is no longer good for you, or when you start to outgrow a friendship, and that there's nothing wrong with those things, that some friendships aren't always meant to be forever, which sometimes is the scariest thing of all to learn, really, that some friendships aren't meant to last, um, that some friendships are better let go of, that some friendships are important at a time for you, but later on they're no longer quite the right fit, and all of that is okay. Like, this is a natural progression of friendships, and it's okay to have some friends that you keep in your life forever, and some friends that you have in your life just for that moment in time. um, I think it's really important to recognize when a friendship is no longer the right one for you, and that it's okay to let it go. That's a hard lesson to learn, I
It
think.
is.
And every time that I've had to do it from childhood all the way until now, every time that I've had to do it, there's sort of heart-wrenching realization, that moment when you realize that it's a thing that has to happen, that you kind of have to let go of this particular friendship, or it just happens as a consequence of you growing apart from each other, having different interests, meeting new people. It's always a difficult thing to reconcile with.
Mhm.
But I think it's an important thing to learn at a young age, that it is okay for your friendships to change and to grow, or to grow apart sometimes. It's okay, and you'll be okay. Um, but it's I think it's important to recognize when a friendship may no longer be what's good for you and what you want it to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and the kind of friendship that you need, right?
Mhm.
Because the kinds that you had when you were younger were very
Mhm.
important and necessary at the time. But
Right.
as you grow, as everyone grows, it just kind of changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully said.
Thank you.
So, getting back to the spooky, is there a ghost story from your childhood that stuck with you?
Um, I heard a lot of ghost stories in my childhood. Um, the ones that stuck with me were always the ones where ghosts were just doing, the ones that sort of really rubbed it in, that ghosts just sort of live in our world too, and we sort of share this space. And they're just living their own ghostly lives. Um, when I was younger, there was a very popular story about how um, there would be a man on a motorcycle is riding home along a dark road, and he stops for a little bit to just take a break, because you know how it is riding a motorcycle on a highway and things like that. Sometimes you just need a break.
Of
So
course.
he stops for a little while to get a drink and just to sort of stretch his legs. And then he gets back on his motorcycle, and he feels it dip a little bit, as if something else has gotten on board with him, right? Um, and he's too afraid to look behind him, because again, we are Malaysian and we grew up with these stories. So we don't necessarily want to see what's happening back there. So he doesn't turn around to look, but he feels compelled to drive to a certain spot. He feels compelled to bring his motorcycle to a certain spot. So he keeps riding and riding, and he's just sort of, praying and trusting that whatever it is going to work out. So he drives his motorcycle, and he ends up at a cemetery, right? And then he suddenly feels the weight lift from his motorcycle. Whatever it is that's behind him gets off. And he hears a voice in his ear sort of whisper, "Thank you,"
Hmm.
or "Terima kasih" in our language. Um, and I just always thought that was the most hilarious. Also, I wouldn't want it to happen to me. Obviously, I wouldn't want it to happen to me. But I always thought it was hilarious, because it was like, yeah, the ghost just needed a ride. Like, just take it home. Like, it's fine. Now you can be on your way. Like, I always thought that was hilarious. It's like, oh, the ghost just needed a lift.
Yeah.
That's all. You just
Oh,
needed a
that's
ride to
all.
get
Super
home.
That's
exciting all
it.
the time in the ghost world. They have to
All
just pick
right,
a
it's
place to
fine.
go.
I just needed to get home, man. And it's a dark highway, just give me a ride. Like, it was just, and obviously, it's not the creepiest story. Obviously, it would be if you were the one going through it.
Wow.
But like, there are far like scarier jump scare type ghost stories out there. But I always just thought that was so fascinating, that this ghost just needed a ride home. Like, just take me home, man. Yeah. And I just thought it was
I
so
love
funny to me. And it's one of the first stories that got me thinking about, what are the logistics of being a ghost? Like, what do you need? Why would you do such a thing? Like, what, it made it interesting to me to think about sort of the inner lives of ghosts.
The inner lives.
Yeah,
Ironically, because they'd have to be dead.
of course, but
Was the motorcycle hitchhiking ghost? Did you include that in some way in The Girl and the Ghost?
I didn't. I thought about how I could work it in there, but I didn't. Um, although the idea of something clinging on to you
Oh, yes.
obviously is a thing that comes through. Um, but yeah, no, I didn't actually manage to include that particular story that I grew up with. No, kind of wish that I did now.
Well, I mean, the way you
Kind
were
of wish.
describing it as just a ghost who needed a ride and like motorcycles, it kind of reminded me of Hussein a bit, the ghost
A
that
little bit,
a
right? A
little
little
bit.
bit.
Like I could
A
that
little
you
bit.
could have been that ghost.
Right. And so when I was imagining the ghosts in the graveyard, when I was imagining Hussein and like the older ghosts
Mm.
who were just sort of bickering with each other in the beginning and things like that, I just really wanted to portray them in the light of, yeah, we're people, we just happen to be dead. Um, like we just happen to be dead, but that doesn't take away who we are.
Mhm.
Like we're still the people that we were. We're just not alive anymore. And so they're still, they still retain the essences of their personalities. They're just not alive. And so, um, like I said, the inner non-lives of ghosts, I guess.
Yeah, no, nice. Yeah. So going to the relationship between Soraya and Jingwei, I
Hmm.
was absolutely fascinated by the beautiful descriptions of all the food and the food that
Yes,
they
it
shared between
wouldn't
the two of
be,
them.
it wouldn't truly be a Malaysian story without many gratuitous like descriptions of food. It
Okay.
simply wouldn't. We are a people that take our food very seriously. So,
Excellent.
Appreciate that.
Excellent. I respect that and I
Yeah.
want more of
yes.
it, actually. um, so what was your favorite Malaysian snack growing up? And did you give it to Soraya and Jingwei as
Um,
well?
there is a point in the book where it's raining and they're sitting outside and they are eating these things called iced gem biscuits.
Mm.
And they're just these little, very small, round, but thick crackers that have a swirl of icing on top, like hard icing. So when I was little, I used to confuse them all the time. I didn't know they were called iced gem biscuits. I thought people were saying they were ice cream biscuits
Ah,
because that little swirl of icing on the top looked exactly like ice cream, like a soft serve that you'd get somewhere, like that swirl.
Yeah.
And so my favorite thing to do was whenever my mom bought it or whenever we went back to my grandma's house, she'd always make sure that there was a jar of it waiting for me. I would bite the top off first. I'd bite the icing off first and sort of chew on it a bit and let it like melt in my mouth a little bit, and then I'd eat, then I'd eat the rest of the biscuit. And so that particular detail comes directly from my childhood. Um, those biscuits. They used to be a lot more common than they are. You can still find them now, but they used to be a lot more common when I was little. Uh, but I have such a soft spot for those biscuits and those snacks. Um, but really, every food that's mentioned in here is a thing that's really common for us
mhm.
that I still eat all the time. But those particular biscuits, I really wanted to work in a scene with those because I grew up with them. That was my childhood, and there's so many things in this book where it's literally just me plucking something from my memories and being like, "Yep, yep, here you go."
I
Just gotta
love
put
any
that right
snack
in
that
there.
I love any snack that has ritual like that. That like your
Yes,
way is like top first, like
yes.
bite the top off.
It was a very like Salt Bay thing. Like let's just
Yeah,
sprinkle my childhood memories in
yeah.
there, and
Just put that
yeah, it
all
was,
over, yeah.
yes, and it was a lot of fun for me because it was just and that's why I think a lot of people who read it are struck by a sort of nostalgic feeling about it.
Hmm.
And I honestly think it's because it's me writing some of my memories into the book, like weaving it into the book. So you can tell that there's a certain nostalgia. There's already a nostalgic lens on it
Mhm.
when I'm writing it, and I think you get the full effect of that when you read it as well, that it feels nostalgic.
Well, because of that, it probably feels so personal, not just to you, but to the readers as well. Like it felt very natural to sort of be brought into
To be
Soraya
brought
and
into this
Jingwei's
world.
relationship because of that.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad it felt that way. I do hear from with Asian readers who say who say it feels like I took their childhoods and their school days and
Mm.
basically just pinned it on paper. Um, but yeah, it's always gratifying to know that it works. You know, a lot of times being a writer is trying a whole lot of different tricks and hoping they land. Um, and I'm glad this one landed. But yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. I have to say that probably my favorite character was Jingwei, because of the amount of Star Wars references she makes throughout the entire thing. I got every single one. The moment she was like, "Okay, we gotta watch Star Wars," I was like, "Oh, that's my girl right there."
Yes. Obviously, that Jingwei's obsession with Star Wars is also a little bit of a self-insert for this author. But you know, everybody's always asked, they're like, "Are you a Star Wars fan?" I'm like, "Honey,
Please.
you can't write this character unless you're a Star
Yeah.
Wars fan. How would you know these references unless you're a Star Wars fan? Why would you ask me this question?" I'm like, yeah,
It
but
seems
yes,
like some gatekeeping nonsense.
I know, right? I'm like, yes, I'm a Star Wars fan, please. But yes, Jingwei was a lot of fun for me to write. She is just, it's so nice to write her in contrast to Soraya, because Soraya is a
Mhm.
character that's still figuring herself out for a good portion of the book. She's trying to sort of recognize who she is. And that's good, because lots of us are still working on that even in our 30s. But um, uh, a lot of us are still working on figuring who we are, who
Mm.
we want to be. And Soraya is in that process. But Jingwei is a character who just is fully herself at all times.
Yeah, yeah.
And I love that about her. I love how she's so confident in her skin. Um, and she makes her jokes, and she, you know, pulls in her Star Wars references, and she's just the truest friend that she can be. And she's just 100% herself all the time,
And
which
there
is really
are those
cool.
people that exist that, they don't feel like
Right.
they're still getting to know themselves. I'm not one of them. I wish I was. Um, but yeah, like there are still those people that they've
Yeah.
always known who they were, and I
And
like
there's
that.
there's nothing wrong with being a work in progress.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's something very grounding about being around somebody who already knows who they are.
Mhm.
There's something very reassuring about being around somebody like that. And Soraya is a character in desperate need of reassurance.
Mhm.
So it was nice to pair them up, and it was a joy to write their friendship. It wasn't even so much about writing a single character,
Mhm.
as it was writing these relationships were the most fun part of the book for me. Both Pink and Jing give Soraya something that she really, really needs in the moment. And writing the way those relationships sort of blossom and expand and change the person that Soraya is and help her figure out who she really is. That was the most fun part for me.
It was so fascinating to see it from both of their sides as well. Like I
Mhm.
was so glad that it wasn't just from Soraya's point of view or just from Pink's point of view, but
Yeah.
you got all this overlapping, which also allowed like to sort of the way that you back to what we were talking about with, letting friendships go
Hmm.
and that, but like seeing it from both of their sides as things were unraveling and then like
Hmm.
growing with her and Jin and oh, it was so yeah, it was expertly woven together. Just all the
Yeah.
emotional intricacies of Soraya changing as she grew up, and it was amazing.
Yeah, I really wanted to write that those 2 points of view. I really wanted you to get both of those points of view, because friendship is never a one-sided thing, even though at some points in a relationship it feels like maybe you're the only one going through all the things that you're going through. But friendships and relationships, those are never one-sided things, and seeing the same situation from both points of view is, I think, a great way to bring up the complexities of how individual people go through the same thing, and how one relationship has an impact on two different people, because it's often difficult to think about it that way when you're in the moment and when you're actually the one who's going through it. It's very hard to think about it in terms of there is a whole other person involved in this, besides what impact they're having on you. Um, it's hard to think about it as a whole separate, there's a whole separate person going through a whole separate set of emotions on the other end of this. So that was also fun. It was it was tricky for me. It's the first time I've written more than one point of view in a book. And while I was doing it, I was sort of in awe of all the authors who have done multiple points of view, not just two, but like juggle like 3 or 4 or 6 or whatever it is these magical unicorns do. I I it's a struggle to write different points of view, because you have to make sure both of those voices are so distinct and separate from each other, because they're two entirely different people. They shouldn't be talking the same way, they shouldn't be thinking the same way. So it's an interesting challenge, and I'm still trying to figure out how other authors manage to do more than two. It just feels like a lot.
I can imagine it would be. Yeah, I've never tried that, but yeah, there are several authors I'm thinking of right now who have like 4 or 5 perspectives sometimes going in a story.
And it's so interesting because each different point of view that you write, you're basically putting yourself in another character's brain, and writing from there. And to do it with 2 was already a juggling act. So those who do 4, 5, like that's incredible. I don't know if I would ever be able to pull that off. But then again, I'm a person who, as soon as I say things like that, will say, "Ha, watch me." So
maybe this is just the building blocks.
Yeah. So maybe I shouldn't have said that, because
just watch, your next book is going to have 7 different perspectives.
now I'm going to I can 100% imagine myself just saying, "You thought this was difficult, let's pull it off." I feel like I'm painting a very clear picture of the kind of person that I am during this call.
Did you have a particular trick on trying to get back into like either Soraya or Pink's mindset? Did you like have to like write from Soraya's perspective for a while, then switch, or could you like go back and forth easy?
I could switch decently well, but that's because I do a lot of preparation before I even start writing the actual book. Now, the world is divided between pantsers and plotters, people who write by the seat of their pants, which I cannot do, which gives me a lot of anxiety. So I am an extreme plotter. I outline my stories beforehand. I then break down my outline into chapters so that I know what each chapter is going to be like. But part of my preparation involves, besides research and outlining and all these things, part of it involves writing character profiles for each of my main characters. I want to know who they are. And a lot of what goes into a character profile might never actually make it on the pages of the actual book, but it helps me understand my characters better, what their motivations are, what their thoughts, what their feelings are, who they are, just who they are as people, or dark spirits, whatever I'm writing at the time. So I knew Pink and Soraya very, very well before I even started writing them. And obviously I got to know them better as I wrote their stories, because characters are like this. You can't control them. They'll just sort of do their own thing on the page. And then you'll go back and be like, "Oh, okay, it's not what I planned for you, but glad you went rogue, I guess."
But thanks.
Thanks. So sometimes characters will grow from the profile that I originally created for them, but it gives me a good sense of who they are right from the beginning. And it helps me keep their motivations consistent throughout the book because I know them and I know what they should be doing in different situations. So it wasn't too difficult to switch between the two of them, and they have very distinct voices,
Mm-hmm.
um, which was on purpose because if I were writing two characters that had very similar backgrounds and upbringings, it would have been harder for me to differentiate their voices. But obviously, a dark spirit and a little girl didn't have the same upbringing. So, so it was a lot easier because they had such drastically different voices.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, it wasn't too bad. It just involves a lot of preparation before the story even begins, which to some people is where the where the it wasn't too bad doesn't seem, appropriate. Some people don't like the plan as much as I do. I get it. I don't actually get it. Planning's fun. Planning is a lot of fun. But some people don't like to plan as much as I do, and so the idea of me saying all that and then saying, "Oh, it wasn't too difficult," like this doesn't compute because doing all that work beforehand is actually probably the difficult part to a lot of people.
Yeah. So
But
like a lot of like mental work to do before you can like properly sit down and like
yes,
become the character. So
just write the story.
yeah.
And some people are just like, I just want to write the story. Um, I I can't do that. I can't do that. I have to know where my story's going um, before I actually take it there.
So to that
So
effect then, did it change? Did the plot or the narrative change sort of from what you initially planned to what was finished?
it didn't deviate significantly from the outline that I had originally set for it. I spent a lot of time figuring out outlines
Okay.
because I really do want to know the story well before I start writing it. And they tell you that you shouldn't edit as you go, that you should just write the story, get it all out there. I can't do that.
Me
If
either.
I know that there's something in the story that needs to be fixed and it's going to affect the rest of the story as it goes, I have to go back and fix it, and then keep going. So by the time I get to the end of a first draft, it usually is more like a third or fourth draft
Oh
because
wow.
I've been going back and fixing and going forward. So my drafts are clean by the time they come out. Um, but yeah, it's just when I make those changes, when I realize that something needs to change, I don't just go back and change it in the book. I change my outline as well.
Hmm.
I change my outline and then I take a look, whatever needs to be changed, I add it or added. I put it in there and then I see if the rest of the outline needs to change. The outline is basically my map. And any change that happens in the map, like any shortcut that I take or any more meandering lane that I decide to take, I have to put it in there so that I don't get lost getting all the way to the end.
Nice.
So the outline will change as it goes, but it doesn't. Yeah, the story doesn't usually deviate significantly from the outline because I am obsessive about the details of my outline.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's clearly the method that
No, no, and it allows me to write faster
Mhm.
because I know what's happening. So I spend a lot of time on the research and the outline and everything beforehand, but that just means when I'm actually writing the story, it goes a lot faster because I've already put up a lot of signposts for myself.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So
So I draft very quickly.
you've also written a number of like YA novels and stories, not just the middle grade.
Well, I wouldn't say a number. I debuted with my young adult novel last year,
Mhm.
and this is my middle grade debut. And then I will have a couple of new books coming out in a couple of years because publishing time. What is time in publishing? Who knows?
What is time
Um,
period?
what is time in general?
Yeah.
But in publishing, everything just seems to take an age. So my next YA novel will come out in 2022.
Mhm.
And that sounds like it's a long way away, but
We hear like
it'll
this.
be here before you know it. And I have another one coming out in 2023. And hopefully you'll see more middle grade from me soon. Um,
That would be great.
we'll
Yeah.
cross our fingers. Um, please buy my work publishing. Um,
Was this one always going to be middle grade? Was there a reason that you
yes.
went that way?
It was always going to be middle grade. I enjoy writing both young adult and middle grade. And I enjoy sort of this ability to hop between the two demographics because it's such a different voice and mindset that you have to put yourself in when you're writing the two different for two different audiences. And I like being able to flip between them.
Hmm.
It it helps, I don't know, it helps keep me fresh as an author to be able to say, and now we will start something in a completely different voice. So when I'm done with a middle grade project, I'll usually flip to a young adult project or vice versa,
Hmm.
just so it keeps me fresh.
Yeah, makes sense.
It keeps me going. If I'm stuck on something for too long, or stuck writing in a for an audience for a particular audience for too long, then I feel like I stagnate a little bit or everything starts to sound kind of samey.
Mm.
And so I like this opportunity to sort of clear the slate and do an entirely new voice. Um, and it keeps me more motivated to keep writing. Yeah.
Excellent. That's a smart and healthy mindset to have as well. You don't get stuck in just like one, like writing like the same kinds of stories again and
Yeah,
again.
I feel like if I go from let's say a YA project to a new YA project, all my characters start to sound sort of the same,
Hmm.
because I'm still stuck in the same kind of voice. Then now there would be in entirely different situations, but they start sounding too similar for my liking. And I never want to be the author that just basically gives you the same heroine but in different settings. I don't really want to do that. Every new book I feel like should be a new experience
Mhm.
for the reader. So I don't want to I don't like it when I start sounding too samey from project to project.
Mhm.
Um, so the moving from young adult to middle grade and back again sort of helps me with that as well.
Okay. I think it also does add to like what you were able to do with blending sort of the horror of sort of a paranormal character, right,
Mm.
with Pink, but then also with the very real kind of horror of like some very intense school bullying,
Yeah.
right?
Some intense school bullying. I tossed in some bad people operating under the mask of religion in there.
Mm.
Like I said, I salt bait a whole bunch of stuff into
It's a
this
lot of
book.
different elements.
There are a lot of different elements. But yeah, the bullying was something that I tried to make as real as possible.
Mm.
I think sometimes that we we sugarcoat stuff for kids a little bit, for younger readers, and I don't think it does them a great deal of justice. I think bullying these days, and for as long as bullying has ever happened, to be honest, has always had a pretty dark element that sometimes is left out of the narratives that we give children as if they can't handle it when they're the ones living through it. Um, and so I tried to keep the bullying realistic, I guess is the word that I want to use for
Yeah.
it, because I think that to me is probably legitimately the scariest part of the book, is that sometimes people do bad things to other people, for no real reason beyond that they feel like it. Um, so yeah, it was important to me to put the bullying in there, um, and to show that it can be overcome
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, yeah, I like a lot of darkness in my stories. Don't know if you can tell. I like a lot of darkness in my
Well,
stories, but I never want it to feel oppressively dark. Like I never want you to feel like you can't find light anywhere,
mhm.
within those stories. And that light could be humor, that light could be hope, that light could be a lot of different things. But I never want you to feel like the darkness is all consuming or that it can't be beaten.
Mhm.
Because I think the real magic in scary stories, whatever it is that you're scared of, notice I don't say ghost stories or horror stories, but scary stories. Whatever it is in the book that's scaring you, I think for middle grade in particular, that it's important to show that that darkness can be beaten, and that it never has to be oppressive, that you can get out of it. So yeah, my stories are dark, not gonna lie. But I think that darkness is also something that we shouldn't shy away from for younger readers, you know?
I think you might have learned that from Star Wars.
Possibly, possibly. I consumed a lot of media as a child that maybe I was not entirely age appropriate. But you learn, yeah, you learn a lot of things from the things that you're reading. You take in a lot from the things you consume, right? Whether you're reading something or watching something that at that age you might not recognize as having internalized. But the older you get, the more you realize how much you've taken in from everything that you've watched and read growing up. So I always think it's really important that that stories should be there are stories that should be dark. There are stories that should be dark, but what are you teaching kids about darkness is just as important as making it creepy for creepiness' sake. Don't get me wrong, writing creepy things is also very, very fun.
You really went there in some areas of this book with the creepy stuff.
It's very fun to write the creepy stuff, but
Very fun to
yeah.
read too. Well, we have one question so far for you from Courtney.
Okay.
She wants
Hi,
to
Courtney.
come up with the name Pink.
I have a daughter who is 5, and she has a tendency, as I think we all do, but when you're 5, you have less of a filter. And around, so when I was writing this book, she was around the age that Soraya was when she first met Pink. And so I thought about what my daughter would name something. What my daughter would name something if she was given the chance to, as she often names her dolls and things like that. And so a lot of that dialogue in that scene where she's introducing Pink to all her dolls, and she talks about why she named them the way that she did. A lot of that is directly, like almost directly lifted from conversations with my daughter, in which she would explain to me why she named things the way she did. And so it struck me that it seemed perfectly natural for me to have my daughter decide that something that she loved should be the color that she loves most.
Yeah.
Perfectly natural.
Especially that was such a sweet scene in the book where they first meet, because
yes,
Pink, or the ghost as we know him at that point, like sort of has this grand entrance and thinks it's going to be this like big moment.
Right.
She's like,
and he has such a different picture in his head of how everything's going to turn out.
Yeah.
And I just think it's hilarious that she then turns around and is like, and your name is Pink.
I love it.
And I think it's great because I think your name really sort of shapes you. And there's a book called Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, where a hellhound is sent for a little boy named Adam, and he's this huge, terrifying creature. It's described as this big, menacing, black dog and stuff. And then they talk about how important it is that Adam names the dog himself, to claim it, right? And to shape it and to bend it to his will. And he ends up naming the dog Dog. And it completely changes the character of this hound that was sent to cause all sorts of mayhem and to be his servant and to be loyal to only him, as dogs usually are anyway. But he names it Dog. And I always thought that was hilarious. It's one of my favorite parts. That book is a book that I love anyway, but that's one of my favorite parts. That's one of my favorite scenes in the beginning, when he's like, and I'm going to name him Dog, and the hellhound has a moment of and then he suddenly transforms into this puppy, like just this
Little
massive
terrier.
puppy.
Who's
Yes,
a
a little
little?
terrier, a tiny little terrier with like a turned out ear. I think there was a detail where he was like, and one of his ears is turned out. I'm like, yes, okay. And so he names the dog Dog. And I sort of wanted to evoke the same sort of feeling by sending you this dark spirit. And you know, he's done all these dark deeds and he has all these dark thoughts. And then you name him Pink. And what does that do to you when that's your name and this is what somebody expects of you? Like how does that shape who you are? I thought that was a fun thing to write.
Great.
Yeah, I see that. I see the connection between the two of them now. When you were talking about like the name, sort of, I had thought of the same scene.
Right.
Romans.
And I love that scene. I mean, I love that book. It's a book that I reread like
Yeah.
every year, just to remember what it is to laugh at something. But come on, guys, we got to take it where we can get it, you know?
You got it.
But I just always, that scene always struck me as just being really funny. It's really funny. And so I like the idea of somebody with this nature being given a name and expected to live up to it. Uh, you know, Soraya puts a lot of expectation on Pink after that to act a certain way, like to be her friend and to chase her and to, you know, draw pictures together and all these things. And
And he
it sort
lives
of
up to
changes who
it
you are.
too.
And he lives up to it because it's hard not to. It's hard not to live up to it when somebody has, you know, expects the best of you. It's hard not to live up to it, and it's hard not to want to live up to it. So
Well, we had Majd ask what inspired you to write The Girl and the Ghost, which we've kind of covered, but
covered a little bit in the beginning, but you might not have been here for that.
Yep.
This started a while ago. We've been talking for a bit um, because I talk too much. But basically, I've always grown up with ghost stories, and one of the ghost stories that I was always fascinated by, or not a story, I guess, but more like a concept that I was always fascinated by was this concept of Saka. That's Saka. And that's a Malay word, but it basically refers to ghosts that are inherited from generation to generation. So um, somebody along your great 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 grandmother would would basically create a spirit or ensnare a spirit. But after she passed, it would have to pass on to somebody in her bloodline. Or there would be consequences, and the consequences are never good. Um, and apparently, you can inherit these ghosts without even realizing that you've inherited them. And so I just wanted to imagine what would happen if you inherited this thing, but you didn't know what it was. Nobody's ever explained this to you. You don't recognize it for what it is. And you turn it into something else. You turn it into a friend. You name it Pink, of all things, and you turn it into a friend because you're lonely and you want a friend. And what happens from there? So it all just really stemmed from this idea of what if you inherited a ghost, but you didn't realize what it was? And you sort of, you know, you shape it into something else. What happens? How long can it retain that shape before things go
all right.
upside down? You know? So that's really what inspired it. And I talked a little bit about this as well in the beginning, but I also like the idea of taking Western concepts and folding them into Malaysian scenarios. And so for readers like you guys, because I'm published in the US, then you sort of have a trail of breadcrumbs to follow that's very familiar, that feels familiar. You know, you're like, oh, you know, the concept of a friend who is who can grant you wishes, which is very much a fairy godmother kind of thing, or the concept of a friend that only you can see but nobody else can see, which is very much an like imaginary friend kind of trope. I like giving you these breadcrumbs as you follow me into locations that might be less familiar for you. I give you sort of familiar little signposts that you can follow along in the story, and then I basically immerse you in a culture that you might not be ever have been aware of before this. Um, so yeah, that's what inspired The Girl and the Ghost.
I have a question about inherited ghosts
Sure.
because uh, in the book, Pink says that it has to be he has to find somebody within the bloodline.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering what happens if you don't, and you just said that it has some dire consequences. So what
Um,
happens to these
a lot you
spirits?
hear Pink repeat the phrase "a Pelicet must have a master" a
Mhm.
lot throughout the book. And the reason is without a master, then you can't control its tendency to want to wreak havoc. You can't really control that. And so um, there, because these instances usually happen in more rural areas, you have a lot of reports of livestock being damaged, or just all sorts of stuff like that.
Okay.
I don't really want to know what would happen in a more urban setting because
Okay.
that's the kind of setting that I live in. Um, but truly, it's not uncommon for, and I've heard this from a number of Malaysians who've read the book, for when you were growing up to be told to be careful of grasshoppers,
Mm.
to be told to stay away from from grasshoppers if you see them when you're playing outside and things like that. Yeah, that's that tiny little guy right there. Um, to be told to be
Absolutely accurate.
careful. Yes, to be told to be careful. What you bring home with you when you're playing outside. And so, I you don't mess with the supernatural. Um, and
Respected.
so and I often get asked in interviews, like, do you believe in these ghosts? Do you believe in the supernatural? And my answer is always, well, I want to say that I don't, but that doesn't mean they don't believe in me, so I should be careful. And it's just take the precautions. It doesn't hurt. And so, yeah, just because I don't believe in something doesn't mean they don't believe in me. So I should just be cautious. I should take the precautions. So yeah, and I see from the comments here that um, Majd said that it reminded you of a story in Arabic culture. Um, and yeah, I think that's because there are Islamic elements in there because I'm Muslim. And so while the Arabic and Malay or Malaysian cultures are not 100% similar, they do share some similarities. I think a lot of what you're seeing is the fact that Soraya is a Muslim, and it's not a story about her Muslimness. That's not really part of it, but it's who she is, so it comes through in the story.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why you see some resemblance to Arabic culture there, because otherwise Malaysian and Arabic culture aren't 100% similar. Um, but yeah, I think we share some of that because of the similarities that we do share are based in a shared religion, maybe.
What you were saying earlier, though, reminded me of something I've heard from people before where they live, yeah, more rural areas. This particular one I heard from when I was traveling in Ireland, and
Mhm.
someone was asked, like, "Do you believe in the fairies?" And they were like, "Well, no, but we do respect them here,"
Yes.
kind of a
You
thing.
see, you
Yeah.
you you show respect. That's I think that's pretty important. Yeah, and Ireland I think has a very rich history of the I was going to say the supernatural, but just more they're in touch with their fae side. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Um, they're in touch with their fae side, and even when you don't 100% believe in things, it's so embedded in your culture and your upbringing that you do show a healthy respect.
Mhm.
And I think it's very similar in Malaysian culture. You're not 100% superstitious. You don't believe necessarily, but it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to show respect.
You
Yeah.
just, yeah.
You
Just
don't need
just
to
be
deny it
careful.
outright. You can.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you don't challenge things you can't see. So maybe just take precautions is all I'm saying.
Well, on that note, an hour has flown by, and we are basically at our time here. So, thank you to everyone who asked questions and joined in.
Yay.
Hannah, thank you so much for joining us, especially
No
so early in the
worries.
morning.
No
Um,
worries. My kids would have woken me up at this time anyway.
okay.
Because again, when you ask what is time, they really have no idea what is time. They just want me to wake up and make pancakes. So, I mean, it's fine.
Okay.
It was a pleasure being here. Thank you so much for your questions and for having me and for enjoying the book. It's been so much fun seeing all the people who have been tagging me and tagging OwlCrate in their pictures reading the book. It's so fun. I love seeing them.
Great pictures of
Yeah.
people with their books this time around too.
I
It's
know it's
fantastic.
so great. I love it. And so it's been really fun. I don't It's a weird time to come out with a book.
Mhm.
2020 is a weird year. Um, and it's a weird time to come out with a book. I don't get to do events as often as I used to, and I don't get to go to bookstores as often as I used to. So I don't see, and other people don't get to go to bookstores as often as they used to either. So to be tagged in so many pictures of people actually reading the book has been such a lift for an author in 2020. It's just been so nice to know that the book is out there and people are reading it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to remember
Yeah.
those things. So it's been just such a pleasure.
Yeah. If you are somebody watching this at a later date and need a reminder, the book is The Girl and the Ghost. It is
Yes.
in
Let
bookstores
me
now.
hold it.
It
Okay,
is
here we go.
available everywhere, and it's fantastic. Middle
Yay.
grade, but as a 34-year-old, I truly, truly enjoyed every minute of it. So,
I'm so glad.
yeah,
Thank you.
everybody go get your copy. It's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all so much. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you
Thank
again
you.
next month.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.